Welcome to the Festival of Storytellers.
I can't tell you how excited I am to be on right now. It's been a couple of weeks of excitement getting prepared, and I've done a lot of things in my life, but this has got to be close to the top.
Thank you, and Reader's Magnet, and thank you, John, for putting this forth and taking the chance on us authors in presenting this out to the world.
I've enjoyed this immensely, Joanne.
Ellie, so have I. Thank you for who you are, and thank you, Reader's Magnet. You all are beautiful, and you've worked so very hard, and we are blessed.
We are.
I thank everybody that's involved with this process, because we know writers need readers and writers need publishers. We thank Reader's Magnet and everybody that's involved. I love Reader's Magnet. They say, we share your stories with the world.
Hello, this is Stephen Woods. I'm the author of Beau's Ace. I'm assuming everyone can see me and hear me now. I'm showing that I'm live now. Okay. This is something new for me. I did a short video that also can be accessed that lasts about 4 minutes. And I did an interview with Kate Delaney about 1.5 years ago concerning my book that's called Beau's Ace. Beau's Ace is about a bull mastiff dog, as you can see on the cover. The two main principal characters are listed on the front cover, and the birds have some symbolism as well. But Ace is a bull mastiff dog who's an angel dog that's sent from God. And Beau is a high school sophomore wrestler who is hearing impaired. And I don't want to give away too much because there's a lot of twists and turns in the book, but the dog shows up and is involved in this boy's life. The boy has some mishaps that set him back, and he has to figure out a new way to seek his fortune in life because he's been ridiculed when he was younger because of his hearing problems. His mother had rubella measles when she was pregnant, and unfortunately Beau, one of the main characters, has this hearing impairment. He's good at reading lips, and but if someone's talking behind him, unless he has his hearing aids in, he can't hear you. I actually acquired the knowledge of how a hearing impaired person would deal with life firsthand, because it turned out I had an uncle tell me years ago that you may have one really best friend in your life, and it turned out that I did, and he ended up being the inspiration for the main character of my book, whose name is Beau. In real life, his name is Burl, and he had a wife who was totally deaf, and so I spent a lot of time around the hearing impaired community for many years. And so that gave me a lot of knowledge about how to present the characters in the book that are hearing impaired. I think the accuracy is there because of my firsthand experience. And then a lot of the other storylines were the result of using characters that are the inspiration from the other characters are mostly from my close family, and as I said, my close friend Burl, and then his parents. So I didn't really understand what I had written until many years later. I probably need to back up and explain that Bo's Ace was actually written completed in the year 2004. I started it in 2003, and it took me about a year and a half. And after I completed it, I sent just some portions of it to a agency in Texas and got a response back, and it was favorable, but they had all these different suggestions, and it was going to cost me a lot more money. If I have time, I'll kind of explain why I've been so poor most of my life. I couldn't afford to do too much. So anyway, I just sat the book down on the shelf, and it was like, I'm going to talk about God a lot. So it's like God told me just to leave the book alone, and that someday it would be shared with the world. So I did. So that was in 2004. And after that, I went back to drinking again. So I guess I'd like to talk a little more about the book before I talk about the backstory of my life that caused the book to be written. But I think the reasons why I wrote the book was I had this compelling reason to tell this story. And there were many, many things that happened to me that led up to me writing this story, which I'm going to try and run through. And I also felt like God was telling me that if I completed this story, that at some point it might someday give me some credibility, so that I could be a voice for change. And people who knew me earlier in my life would say that I'm probably the last person in the world that you would expect to be someone who actually has knowledge at this point that could offer positive change for the world, because quite honestly, for most of my life, I was a very wicked person. And I had an awakening that first happened in 1996. So maybe I just need to go back and start from what led up to the spiritual, because this book is so spiritual, but yet the dog in the book is quite humorous. I don't know where all that humor came from that the dog exhibits, but basically the dog can listen. He can hear all language, all the different languages on the planet, and he can also teleport himself anywhere on the planet. He cannot speak, and that's a big issue for him and for the things that happen in the book, because he's a dog, and he can't speak. But he has these ways of manipulating the characters throughout the book that are humorous at many times. There's a particular chapter I devote to the visitation in their house one day of the Bozell family's house. The uncle stops to visit, and his name is Stinky Uncle Stanley. Well, Stinky Uncle Stanley, I had an uncle, and that wasn't his name, but that was kind of the inspiration for that character. And there's a quite funny interchange between the dog and this character in the book. So once again, I kind of keep going back to the ideas I had that created the various stories in the book. And I also want to emphasize that I wrote the book with the idea that it would make a great movie, because once again, God emphasized to me that there's so much illiteracy in the world right now. So many people cannot read and so I purposely made the book very visual. You could almost visualize in each chapter like it would be a scene in a movie. The dog on the big screen in a movie with all these things that happen that involve these supernatural events, I think would be both entertaining and enlightening to whoever's watching it. So Um, I wrote it for a twofold reason. I obviously there's things that an author says in a book that can't really get translated into an actual movie. So you lose some things from the book, but for the most part, I think the story itself will be quite entertaining in the form of a movie. So getting back to me, I find myself now living in. I just moved about 4 months ago. I live about halfway between Detroit, Michigan, and Ann Arbor now, right off of I-94, about halfway in between, a little bit closer to Detroit. And I moved up here because I just didn't feel comfortable in my home state areas of Nebraska and Iowa anymore. I was born in Nebraska, and I have a question here that says, have you thought about the title first before writing the actual story? Well, the title actually came about from me sitting in a bar with an old friend who had a dog named Ace. It wasn't a bull mastiff dog, but this particular dog was named Ace, and he was an extremely intelligent dog, much like this German Shepherd that I had for several years myself. And so that's kind of the idea for the dog part of it. And the Bogue was easy because that's my friend Burl. So the title of the book was there from pretty much the very beginning. You take the title actually, and then from the title came the outline, I guess. And then from the outline, and I really feel like God kind of gave me the outline and I just kind of filled in the details. So I feel like I exhibited my own individual creativity, but with the guidance of God in such a way to help to create an interesting story that also has quite a message. So getting back to my situation, when I was only 4 years old, believe it or not, this all kind of started, the spiritual thing all kind of started. Now, I'm going to start talking about some stuff that I was trying to talk to Kate Delaney about, and bless her heart. I know she's a very popular and an intelligent lady. In fact, she endorsed my book. So thank you to Kate for doing that. And the interview went quite well, I thought. But when I was talking to her about some of the stuff that's happened to me, she said, "Oh, no, you can't say that because you're going to scare people away. You're going to, you just can't say these things." So now I'm going to say what happened. It's the truth. I can't be timid about this. I'm 69 years old now. Time's running out for me, and I've lost so many friends and family and everything over this obsession I have to. So let me kind of run through how this all got to this point. First of all, I have to admit I've been married and divorced 4 times. Gone through bankruptcy 3 times. Late in my life, before I was forced into bankruptcy by the major newspaper I was working for in Omaha, I was working 3 jobs. And I actually worked 2 jobs 7 days a week in my 4th marriage for 16 out of 20 years that I was in that situation. I was the credit manager at the newspaper, had employees working for me. Worked that full time, and then on the weekends I actually washed dishes at the small cafe and bus tables, and because I had to, it was the only way to keep us afloat. And then toward the end, the furnace went out, so then that was a huge bill. And so then I finally got a job cleaning offices at night during the week. So I was working 72 hours a week, busting my butt. I stayed in a declining industry occupation at a newspaper that was flying high for many years. And then around 2008, when the bottom dropped out for everybody else and the internet started causing major changes, everything started going downhill from there. I'm not saying anything that's not true. I'd only stayed somewhere no more than 4 years, 4 years here, 4 years there, 4 years at this other place. And I was starting to feel like I was getting a reputation of being a job jumper. So I hung on and stayed at the OWH for 22 years, but I didn't get a raise for a long time. So, my retirement is not the best situation it could be. It could certainly be a lot better. But let's go back to the beginning again. And I'm sorry I keep jumping around a little bit, but there's just so much to tell, and there's so many strange things involved. So when I was 4 years old, my mother was singing for a funeral, and I was in the backyard playing around with this decorative mailbox. And being only 4 years old and just recently turned 4 years old, I had no idea that it wasn't an active. I didn't really know what a mailbox was at that point for sure. But anyway, I opened the thing up, and these hornets come flying out and stung me all on the forehead, and I passed out. And my little grandma, who was only like 4'10", Grandma Louise, carried me down into the basement, put a washcloth over my head, I guess, and I woke up about 20 minutes later. Well, I'm going to get to the story later on where you're going to find out where I got stung by a hornet again, and where I got stung by this hornet, and the timing of getting stung by this hornet. I keep telling people, God hasn't just nudged me in my life. It's like he's hit me over the head with a sledgehammer. And these things have started really, most of the supernatural things happened in the last 6 years since I survived a suicide attempt. And once again, I apologize for jumping all around. But so anyway, I'm stung by those hornets when I'm 4 years old. And so I go home that night. We're still on the farm. My dad was a tenant farmer. And that night, God tells me that's the night that in my head, I first heard a voice that said something real big's going to happen to you someday. I'm 4 years old. I don't know what that means. It was weird that I was having this saying in my head all the time, saying that to me. And then it just kind of progressed from there. When I was a teenager, I was joking around with people before that, I was hearing this voice when I was like 6 or 7 years old that I knew some secret that no one else knew. What the heck does that mean? So, and then when I'm a teenager, I know there's people, if they're still around, that would maybe remember that I used to joke around that I felt like an alien just visiting this planet. So then, I really screwed up the first 3 marriages. They were all my fault. Being an alcoholic and drinking like I did, somehow I managed to make it through college, but I really slowed down my drinking during that time, like between the late 70s into the early 80s. I actually graduated magna cum laude from the University of Nebraska, Omaha in 1981. But it was my degrees are in business and marketing. They're not in journalism or anything like that. And quite honestly, when I was in high school, it was obvious to me that I was not one of the smarter English students, because if you were a smart kid back then, you got this one certain teacher. And if you weren't viewed as being real smart in English, or it seemed that way, you got this other teacher. Well, I got the other teacher. So, now I see a voice saying, what pushed you to really write this book and share your truth? It was just an obsession that's built up because of all these supernatural things that have happened to me that I'm explaining right now. So then when I'm in the Marine Corps, and it's like I'm 22 years old at that point. So I'm going to explain some major things that happened every 22 years in my life. And then it was brought to my attention that was something that was significant, the number 22. None of this stuff I knew. That's why I keep saying there's so many parallels between my book, Bozace, and this dog and all the things he does. He has an obsession for dog bones in the garbage one night that gets him into trouble. Well, I'm still an alcoholic addict. Okay. I've read the Bible through twice, all the way through, specifically for that purpose. I've read the New Testament portions of that over and over and over again. But I certainly, I couldn't sit here and quote scripture to you, nor do I feel that it's important at this point. If God is telling me things and they make sense, and they make sense to me, maybe they'll make sense to you. I'm sure a lot of the things that God tells me are all if you looked in the Bible, it's pretty much, you can find it in there, although God has told me that there are some things in the Bible that you can't take literally, and that there's things that Jesus never said. For instance, Jesus says that he never said that gay people could not find the kingdom of heaven. And he's actually appalled. I say these things in my website. I explain all this stuff, that he's appalled by what's going on now. You know, these things I'm talking about, it's actually very dangerous because, you know, one thing I'm of the opinion now is that all the current religions, as God has explained to me, are Band-Aid solutions. They don't stop sin from occurring. None of them really do. And I'm seeing more and more, you see a trend toward people saying that they're spiritual still, but they're not religious. In other words, they're not into religious institutions. Well, quite honestly, I'm not anymore either. But that doesn't mean that I can't listen to God, tell the truth 24/7, and be a totally different person than I used to be. So it was brought to my attention by God that I'd really screwed things up. And the first time that happened was on the night of August 15th, 1996. I had just left my third wife, was heavy into drinking at that time. Alcohol has held me back at various stages in my life. And I'm proud to announce that I've been sober now for within 1 month. I'm 5 months sober. And I know I'll never drink again. So anyway, getting back to my story, I'm in the guest room of my parents' house on the night of August 15th. It's all dark. The shades are pulled down. And I think that was my moment. That was the crossroads in my life, but it wasn't the last. So I think there was a little bit of me that night that I let go of that I never could let go of before. And I did, and the room got very bright. I could see the pictures on the wall, and I raised my arms above me like this in an upside down V, and I prayed and I cried for over an hour. I soaked my sheets with my tears, and the next morning, it's like the voice in my head again, and I mean, who could it have been but God? Woke me up and told me to go into the kitchen and turn on the Catholic religious channel. And I was raised Lutheran. I'd never watched this before. So I turn on this program at 4:00 in the morning, and there's Father Benedict Rochelle from New York giving a sermon about the prodigal son. So if I'm not the prodigal son, then who is? So then it got worse. I mean, I say worse, it got more weird. The very next morning, that same voice woke me up out of bed and said, this time turn the radio on to the lowest dial on the AM. So I did. And lo and behold, Billy Graham has given a sermon about, guess what? The prodigal son. This was the very next morning. So then the next night, I was having trouble going to sleep, obviously, after all this stuff has happened to me. And all of a sudden, I started getting these visions of all these evil things that you could possibly imagine, like in full color, flashing through my mind that was just scaring the hell out of me. I was seeing things that you don't want to see. And I called out, please, God, help me. And I felt this warm hand on my shoulder. And I immediately calmed down. And then the voice said, turn on the light. I want you to write something. You need to write this down. So I had this piece of paper. There was some writing at the top of it because I was messing around with some poems or something. So I just had a sheet of notebook paper, and I grabbed a pencil. I didn't even have a pen. And I started writing. So it only took me about 10 minutes. And in my website, I have the original front and back of this sheet that I wrote because I only had about so much room at the bottom. And I was just writing feverishly, like it was crazy how sloppy the writing was. And then I flipped it over and wrote down the other side. It took me no more than a little over 10 minutes. And he said to call it The Message. So quite honestly, the stuff in it that I wrote, I didn't have a clue what it was all about. I really didn't. I didn't know what I wrote. I understood some of it, but not all of it. And I thought, wow, you can only imagine what you would think at that point. Now it says, you mentioned you were an alcoholic before, but what was the turning point in your life that made you realize this has to stop, has to change? It was a suicide. I barely escaped a suicide. It was June 15th. I'd left. I was still with my fourth wife. It was 2015. I hadn't gotten through my story yet to explain that I got married then a fourth time, but this was different because I'd seen the light. And then I ended up writing Beaux Ace, but then I went back to drinking for like 10 years, drinking heavily. I shouldn't be alive today. That's another reason why it shows this is all such a miracle. I'm not kidding you. I was drinking like 4 1.75 liter bottles of vodka every week, drinking lots of beer on the weekends at the bar and shots, stopping every night on the way home after work at the liquor store and buying a half pint of schnapps and dropping that down in a few seconds. I mean, I was just washing in alcohol. I have friends that drank as much as I did. They're not on this planet anymore. They died. So I left work early one day on June 15th, 2015, and I stopped my usual thing. I got very drunk, went to my closet where I thought my guns were, and they weren't there because my ex-wife had overheard, and my oldest stepdaughter had overheard me talking apparently about suicide. I don't remember even saying anything about it. But what they didn't realize was that there was a third gun that was still up on the shelf that if I'd found it, I probably would have been successful that night. Well, anyway, I went running out on the porch and crying and yelling about everything. And next thing I know, the cops showed up and I got handcuffed and got taken. And I was in this rehab place for about 4 days. And I came out of there like Jimmy Stewart from It's a Wonderful Life. It was just it was so close. I came so close to death. I mean, talk about near death experiences. That was only one of several times. I don't say several, but there's been a few times that I know I was close to death. So anyway, I wrote that message, and then within days, God's telling me details about how to make that message work. So this is all in my website, beauxaceauthor.com. There's a whole bunch of different attachments in there you can open up that I've written. I ended up leaving my fourth wife after almost 20 years, and it was because we had grown apart. We were only roommates, and I just don't want to bash anybody from my past, but I'm not lying when I say that. And she would have to admit that she always told me she never believed anything about my spiritual life before we met and the things that I was trying to tell her. She just wouldn't believe it. She was Catholic. And so some of the things that I wrote that are in my website, I wrote those when I was by myself living alone across the river over in Council Bluffs. So for the most part, other than having Burl, who's the main character of my book, one of them, took him in to live with me for about 1.5 years recently. Other than that, I've lived alone since my fourth marriage in basically isolation. And I feel like God has kind of been molding me and whipping me into shape and things like that. Getting back to my story, the Iowa School for the Deaf in Council Bluffs is there's couple chapters devoted to that. I ended up living close to there, and I don't have a bike right now. I wore it out, but I was riding my bike around there, and I swear God told me to ride my bike to the front entrance of this Iowa School for the Deaf, which is very prominent in my book, and go up the steps, and partway up, there's a bench there. And there's a name of a person who dedicated the bench, and the year is 1952. That's the year I was born. So moving back in time again, I was in the Marine Corps, and it's 22 years later, and I'm in a lake in Japan. And we were drinking too much that night and stuff like that. And we decided to go for a swim around midnight. So I never was a real great swimmer. So about halfway back, I think I passed out or something. Next thing I know, I'm thrashing in the water, and I thought I was going to die that night in the lake. And next thing I know, I'm on the shore, pulling myself up off, onto the shore, and I don't know how I made it there. So I mean, it became very obvious to me that God saved my life that night. So that was another key event 22 years later. And then it was brought to my attention at that point, and this was all before 1996, where the room got bright, that this water was crystal clear all the way to the bottom. So there was an analogy made with crystal clear water where I almost drowned that night in Japan, and crystal clear thinking for humans. It has to do with God's hidden wisdom. So then 1996, I'm married to my third wife, and leave her, which I shouldn't have. It was all my fault again. It was the alcohol. But then I told you what happened after that. It was kind of like a second reawakening, second come to Jesus type of thing, where I came out of that hospital, and everything was even more different at that point. So anyway, getting back to my story, I ended up living with Burl. I invited him to live with me, like I said, because his mother had died. He was taking care of her for quite some time before her death. And once again, I say that his mother was the inspiration for, well, her and my mother were kind of the combination of the two were the inspiration for Martha Bozell, the Bozell family, because Bo's last name is Bozell. His father, Henry, owns a body shop in Plattsmouth, Nebraska, which is a short drive from Omaha, Nebraska, to the south. And so now I kind of lost my train of thought here. This is a long story. I'm sorry. Getting back to Burl. Okay. So his house where he lived in, where he was raised and everything, they were selling all this stuff. And for many years, I've been reading a book called, since 1996, shortly after that, a religious friend of mine brought to my attention this book called My Utmost for His Highest by Oswald Chambers. You can see that you can see the book is very worn out. Every morning reading this book, My Utmost for His Highest by Oswald Chambers, and that's where I was saying my prayers. It was in the bathroom. So anyway, I'm helping Burl with like the yard sale and selling all this stuff off. And there's so many items. There was no reason for him to give this to me other than his mother, who had passed away, who is known to be a practical joker in real life, who I talked about heaven with her not too long before she died. He gave me this gift, and I didn't want it at first. I said, no, I don't want that. Now it says, think pot on the top. That kind of has double meaning. But that's where I, quite honestly, and I'm an open book now. I'm not going to lie about anything. That's where I sat with my book, Oswald Chambers' book, and for like 20 some years. So it was an inside joke because like Jesus told her that that's where I did that. So that gift was like a gag gift. Well, then Burl also gave me, and I'm like I say, there were many items he could have gave me, but she was the only one that was religious of the family. And she had a remarkable life. She was a very giving woman, very religious, but also a practical joker. So anyway, the other thing I received was like a 5 foot by 4 foot angel picture, which I have in storage back in Council Bluffs right now. So it was like, I swear, these were like gifts from heaven. Well, about 60 days before I was moving from my 1-bedroom apartment where I wrote most of the stuff that's in my website, I'm going to show you something that suddenly appeared in my basement, in my bedroom, outside bedroom windowsill. Okay. Didn't know where it came from. Just suddenly appeared there out of nowhere. So it's like God's been explaining to me a lot of things that I mentioned in my website about 3 of everything, you know, the Trinity, obviously 3 of this, 3 of that. So I was thinking, okay, that's my 3rd gift from heaven, you know. So when I went to grab the thing and take it to the other apartment, when Burl and I were moving into that apartment, I got stung. Now, if you look at the back, who knew that it was hollow in the back, and you can see the nest area right here that's still there. I have proof that I got stung. That's the first time I'd been stung in 6. Now, come on, people. I swear I'm not crazy. If these things happen to you, what would you think? So, I mean, the backstory almost overwhelms the actual story of Bose, but I'm telling you, it's all interrelated. I was never a brilliant English person in high school. I was kind of a lazy student back then, and no one could have predicted that I would have written this book. And yes, the question is it a hornet's nest? I saw the hornet not only stung me, but he stung me on the same finger, my right index finger, that between the year 2017 and 2020, I've had 3 different images created in my fingernail. Seriously, the nail, the hard enamel nail, has been reshaped into 3 different images. And this all happened. The first one appeared while I was still living over in Omaha and with my last wife. And then the other 2 appeared while I was living in Council Bluffs. Now, I've tried this before I went live to see if this would work. So these images are in my website, but I just thought I could probably show you a little bit, have some idea. Okay, let's see if I can find a place where you can see it. There's a lot of glare here. No, that's not working. Well, it worked earlier better. See, I have a window in front of me, and as time's going by and I'm talking about this, it's getting, there it's a little easier to see. Darn it, I wanted you to be able to see this. They're harder to see sometimes. The website, I ask them to make the images bigger, but it's the number 2. I'm sorry you can't see it better. It's the number 2. And then after that image, it went away. And my finger's perfectly normal now. I've never had to go to a doctor to see about anything. And then the second image that came along was an image of a face. Crap. Shoot. This isn't working. Oh. Yeah, you can almost see it. There's a face there. It looks like Jesus looking off to the left. You can see a head of hair and eyes and chin and everything. So then the last image in 2020 was an image that's been identified to me as a dragon. And if you can actually, on the far left, you can actually see a head with 2 eyes, but it's kind of hard to see here. If you were sitting here next to me, you could see it easier. So I'll be honest, there's a lot of times where I wish I was just a normal person. I just wish I'd stayed with my first wife and had some kids. See, that's another thing. I had a couple daughters from my second marriage, and because of my alcoholism, they don't trust me anymore. I've got two granddaughters that I've never met. I've seen pictures of them. And when my mother passed away last December, my daughters didn't bring my granddaughters to my mother's funeral. And that's one of the reasons why I moved away. And then my younger brother, I said I'm an open book. I'm not going to lie about anything. My younger brother said I was an embarrassment to the family. He used to be Lutheran and he converted to Catholicism. And I have some strong feelings about portions of that religion that has to do with, well, let's put it this way. God told me that the three greatest gifts that God gave to humankind is music, the love of our pets, and orgasms. Now, can anybody else think of anything greater than those three things? I bet you can't. So the stupidest thing the old hierarchy of the Catholic faith did centuries ago was to say that their priest could not marry. I think that was a huge, huge mistake. It invited every pedophile on the planet for centuries. And look at the destruction and I've heard a lot about that. You've probably all heard a lot about that. I know that there's thousands and thousands of people that are probably my age now that have some memories that they can't erase, that they'll never be able to erase. So anyway, I'm kind of getting off topic here a little bit, but I have a question here that says, what kind of music do you like? Well, I kind of was really into Led Zeppelin, really into Moody Blues, heavy into Moody Blues, love Moody Blues. I used to do a lot of acid and listen to Moody Blues. Wow. But anyway, it was through Sirius Radio that I got turned on to the 90s alternative rock and grunge. And oh my God, I couldn't believe what I'd been missing all those years. Now I can't get enough of Pearl Jam, Smashing Pumpkins, Stone Temple Pilots. Oh my God, I love them. I listen to them a lot. And, you know, I've never had the money and never been able to afford to go to concerts. I would love to see some of those groups like that in concert. Filter is a band that I can relate to. There's a song called Take a Picture. And I swear, God, that was written for me. It's like, Dad, how do you like me now? Now that I've been sober for almost 5 years. Every time I listen to that song and I listen to the lyrics, because he's talking about someone who's so damn drunk that, and I finally got wised up to about a walking drunk or walking, you know, you're passed out, you have no memory the next day, but you're actually walking around and doing things and maybe even driving a vehicle. How scary is that? I have many, many things I did when I was wicked that I have to live with, not just for the rest of my life, but for eternity now, because God has proven to me that God is real. Just like I'm trying to prove by writing Bose, how people's lives change dramatically when it's proven to them that God exists. That's why it's my desire that this is really real, and this 1% is going to realize that things have got to change. You know, God actually told me that somebody asked me about the music thing, and I'm so glad somebody said that, because I have the lyrics here to Jeremy, because God told me I was Jeremy the Wicked for much of my life until just recently after this last go around with the suicide attempt and everything. So let me read the lyrics to this, and I'm going to immediately tell you how this relates to my life. because God told me this. I didn't know. I had no idea this song had anything to do with me. Was never into Pearl Jam until just within the last, I'm going to say 4 years, 5 years. So it talks about, it starts with at home drawing pictures of mountaintops with him on top, lemon yellow sun, arms raised in a V, and the dead lay in pools of maroon below. Okay, remember what I said about 1996 when I was laying in my bed and I soaked my sheets with my upside down V above my head in prayer, and the dead lay in pools below? Just saying. Okay, let's keep going here. Daddy didn't give attention, oh, to the fact that mommy didn't care. King Jeremy the Wicked, oh, ruled his world. My father moved us so many times I almost lost count. And my poor mother never complained ever about anything. She was raised in town, and my dad was a farmer, and they met right after World War II was over, and she married him, and she became a farm gal. And so I wrote a poem that they read at her funeral called "She Never Complained." It was pretty moving, and well, anyway. So I'm just saying, my dad never noticed that my mom never complained about anything. And my dad had a hair trigger temper. He was a good man. He did so many things for me, but he had a hair trigger temper. I never saw him strike my mother, although he struck me several times. But he said a lot of mean-spirited things to her when he would get angry. He was short-tempered, had no patience. And my mother would just smile and say, "Oh, Lyle," you know. And I realize now, I never saw my mom commit sin that I can think of in any way. She was like an angel on earth. So that's kind of how the lyrics relate there. And then it gets into, I'm not going to talk about the refrain yet because I want to get back to that. But then it talks about, clearly I remember picking on the boy, seemed like a harmless little F. But when he unleashed the lion, gnashed his teeth and bit the recessed lady's breast, how could I forget? And he hit me with a surprise left. My jaw left hurting, dropped wide open, just like the day, oh, like the day I heard. When I was in the 5th grade, I had a best friend that I actually attended Sunday school with. There was a substitute teacher that day. She left the room for a little bit. Well, he and some other guys decided they were going to take my pants down in front of the girls. Well, I turned into the raving, crazy, like in this lyrics. And I remember hitting my friend. And what happened that day exactly matches what they're singing about in this. Now, I understand that Pearl Jam wrote the song, Eddie Vedder wrote the song in the early 90s, but I'm telling you, some of the lyrics relate to stuff that happened back in the early 60s, and some of it relates to stuff that was in the future when he wrote it. From my perception, you can argue with me all you want, but I'm telling you, it seems to match up pretty well. So then from there it says, a daddy didn't give affection. No, and the boy was something that mommy wouldn't wear. King Jeremy the Wicked, oh, ruled the world. My dad never once hugged me. He never, that I can remember, never hugged me, never kissed me, never told me he loved me. No affection whatsoever, physically. But he overhauled 4 cars of mine, a motorcycle, which he had never worked on motorcycles before. He rode out to the East Coast with me when I did a short stint working for the FBI after I got out of high school. That didn't last long because my eyesight wasn't good enough, and so I ended up leaving there and then joining the Marines after that. But my dad did so many things for me, but he just couldn't, his dad died when he was 12 years old. So he didn't really have a father figure after that. Just didn't come from a family that believed in showing physical affection. So he never once did, but I like to think that someday I'll get a hug in heaven. And because I like to think the way I'm acting now, I'm actually going to make it there now. Now, the refrain talks about Jeremy spoke in class today. God immediately made me think of John 16:7 through 16:5 through 16:17 that talks about the advocate coming someday. And Jesus is talking to his disciples 2,000 years ago, and he's telling him about the advocate coming. And he's saying he will not speak on his own. He will speak only what he hears. And he will tell you what is yet to come. He will glorify me, because it is from me that he will receive what he will make known to you. All that is the Father's is mine. That's why I say the Spirit shall receive from me what he will make known to you. Okay. I've showed you all the things that have happened to me, the actual physical proof that I have that these things, and once again, I live by myself now. I'm really, I'll be honest, I'm estranged from my family right now. And quite honestly, I don't have any desire to move back to Nebraska and Iowa. I don't like the politics back there. I've become, because of, my feeling is when innocent children were being ripped apart from their mother's arms down on the southern border, why weren't so-called Christians up in arms back then? All over, all Christians. Because Jesus was, if you know what Jesus believed in, but that didn't happen. There's got to be some radical change. I read recently where back in the 50s, when I was a young boy, it was probably 73% of people claimed that they attended church on a regular basis. That percentage, from what I've seen recently, if it's accurate, is down to like 40%, 47%. So like half of all the people in the world, less than half of all the people in the world have any desire to attend church gatherings. And I'm one of them at this point, because God has getting to I see my hour live here is getting close to coming to a close. So let me finish up with something that's going to blow your mind. But the reason why I feel confident to say that I don't sin anymore is because I do two things now that are detailed and explained in instructions in my webpage. And one is that you slowly train your mind consciously to just wait a split second before you answer when you're presented with a problem or anything like that, or someone asks you a question. Don't answer right away, because God explained to me it's like your mind accelerates out to your own free will, which is a very small portion of your brain. So the faster you answer, the more you're using your own free will answer, and your answers kind of suck, quite honestly, compared to if you just wait for God's answer, which is a lot better answer than you could come up with. And then along with that, believe it or not, and I'm a human being, I'm a mortal, I've proven it can be done, so I know it can be done. It just depends on how badly you want it, how badly you want this radical change. And that is that you train your subconscious mind to send the prayer, praise God, speak Lord to you every time you have a negative thought about another person, place, or group. It's like a stopgap measure when you get tired, because this requires 24/7, second by second focus to keep listening to God. And if you falter and you're tired, your subconscious automatically sends that prayer to your conscious mind to remind you that Jesus is right there to give you the best answers. It's been working great for me. If it works for me, it can work for you. He even gave me the idea that, now I'm not saying this would work, but I got the idea from listening to God that, we're trying to find clean energy. So how about the idea that our planes fly 24/7 throughout the skies? There's actually emergency propellers that come out when some of these planes lose power that help them land. I'm saying you retrofit all of our commercial aircraft and maybe military with these highly efficient rotor blades that capture massive amounts of energy into a hydrogen cell in the cargo bay. It would create a second revenue stream for the airlines and provide tons of clean energy captured. Can imagine all these planes flying out that fast in the air. For energy to have value, the earnings has to exceed the cost. So the extra little drag that these highly efficient rotor blades might create on all these aircraft, the massive amounts of energy that could be captured would far overshadow the extra drag that these propellers would cause. That's just my idea. But you got to admit, it's pretty damn creative. Now, scientifically, if it's not something that's can be logistically put into place, but I'm just saying that's just one example of the things that, and I wasn't even couldn't even consider myself that smart in science, but and I could talk to you about another thing, some other things too. I'm being told we're down here to the last 5 minutes, so I talked so much this first hour here, I didn't really give anybody a chance to ask too many questions. So if anybody has a question for me before we sign off here, I'd be happy to answer it. I make no apologies for my life. I know I was a horrible person for a good share of it. Alcohol had a lot to do with it, but also there was more to it than that. I have a horrible legacy. I guess one thing I want everyone to know is maybe you can, through reading Bose and supporting the ideas that I talk about in my website, we can create some real lasting change in this world that we desperately need. And it's never too late to be a different person than you've been most of your life. I'm living proof of that. I desperately want to improve my legacy. Someday I want my daughters to maybe read my book, understand that there was more to me. They don't have to be afraid of me. That wasn't the old me, and I'm different now. So it's never too late to listen to God and become a better person. So I guess that's the last thing I would want to leave with everyone is. So one last time, this is my book, Bose. And there's a pretty good review there from Kirkus Review that compares it to Stephen King as far as the special effects. There's some other reviewers that have mentioned that say they're actually saying that they say, and I quote, "This author separates himself from other authors." Well, I don't take credit for that. If I separate myself from other authors, God's the one who caused me to do that. It wasn't my doing. I owe this all to God, just like I talked about it in those Bible verses. It all fits like a glove. So please read Bose, and maybe we can make this a hell of a good movie to watch. I've actually had dreams and visions of attending the premiere someday. So I've had a lot of dreams and visions. So they've all come true so far. That's another freaky thing. Some of these things I dreamed about 50 years ago have come true in real life now. Go figure. I don't know. So I'm tentatively planning on going live again, I believe tomorrow. I'll have to check my schedule. I don't have it in front of me here, but I know I do a live interview on Thursday at 1:30 in the afternoon on Eastern time. I know that for sure. I may cancel the one that I think I have scheduled for tomorrow at the same time at 4 o'clock Eastern, but we'll see. But thank you very much. So I'll see you on Thursday for sure. Goodbye.